Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session, Assessing Climate Vulnerabilities of Natural Resources. I want to thank our sponsors again for their support and being able to offer you this programming today. Some housekeeping, the session is started, and those of you in the hybrid world, if you can't hear us, make sure your stream is enabled in Zoom, and there are also instructions in the chat. Everyone in person, please be sure that your devices are silenced, and during the Q&A, speak loudly and clearly. We will be coming around with a microphone if you ask a question, and that enables the people in the Zoom world to hear us. And those of our virtual attendees, please use the Q&A function to ask questions, and there is the email if you're having technical difficulties. I think we covered that. We are offering CEUs for this session, APA Planner CM credits. If that is something you're interested in, you'll need to sign in and out in the sign-up sheet in the back of the room. And virtually, it is automatic. And a note, you must attend the entire session to receive credit. So with that, I will introduce our speakers today. We have three. Dr. Jacqueline Rhodes is Executive Director of the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. She received her doctorate degree in environmental policy from Drexel University. She further pursued a certificate in executive management of nonprofits from the University of Pennsylvania. She serves on many boards and committees, including the Darby Creek Valley Association, Friends of the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge, New Jersey League of Conservation Voters, and the Norwood Shade Tree Environmental Advisory Council. She is the vice chair of the Delaware County Sustainability Commission and was on the transition team for Delaware County Council that created the model for the Sustainability Commission. Tanya Rohrbach is a CFM Program Manager of Policy and Planning for Sustainable New Jersey. She is the Program Manager of Policy and Planning at the Sustainable Jersey Program at the Sustainability Institute of the College of New Jersey. She is a certified floodplain manager and assists local governments in achieving sustainability-focused conservation, climate adaptation, and community development goals. Tanya holds a BA in biology and a MS in geography from Rutgers University. As the lead author of the Guide to Local Climate Change Adaptation Planning, the Model Climate Change-Related Hazard Vulnerability Assessment for New Jersey municipalities, she is a leader in the state for instituting municipal climate resilience guidance and action. And lastly, Thomas Flynn, Environmental Specialist Floodplain Administrator, FEMA CRS Coordinator for the Township of Woodbridge. Mr. Flynn holds a Bachelor's of Science degree from Rutgers University and a Master's degree from the City University of New York. He is the Township of Woodbridge Environmental Specialist, Floodplain Administrator, FEMA CRS Coordinator, and supports OEM recovery. He was previously named New Jersey Association for Floodplain Management's Local Floodplain Management Official of the Year and has nearly 20 years of experience in protecting ecological resources, flood mitigation, and environmental policy analysis. His municipal role focuses on enhancing the manner by which the community addresses and improves environmental practices from ecological uplift and climate resilience to compliance with state and federal regulation. So please join me in welcoming our speakers, and Tanya will be the first one.
Short. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So I'm with Sustainable Jersey, and in case if you're not familiar with the Sustainable Jersey program, I'll just start with a brief description. Sustainable Jersey is a nonprofit organization administered by the Sustainability Institute, which is centered right here at the College of New Jersey. So we provide tools, training, and financial incentives to support communities as they pursue sustainability through various actions in the program. So the program culminates in a certification award to municipalities and schools because we have a municipal program and a schools program, that have documented meeting a set of rigorous standards found in our different actions. So more than over 25,000 actions by municipalities and schools have been implemented in the program so far. Since the program's start in 2009, 83% of New Jersey municipalities are participating in the program. And so that encompasses 91% of New Jersey's population. So it's a pretty effective program, reaching a lot of places and people across the state. In the presentation today, I'll discuss a program in the Sustainable Jersey Municipal Program, but I do want to mention that the Sustainable Jersey for Schools program has a lot of great resources for public schools to meet the requirements for climate change education, because I think there are a few education folks here today. So I'll go over a couple of resources in our climate readiness municipal program. We currently have 4 main resources available. 3 of them are on this slide. First is in October of 2023, we released a guide to local climate change adaptation planning in partnership with New Jersey Future. I was working there at the time, kind of migrated with the guide to Sustainable Jersey. Second, in September of 2024, we launched a new action in the municipal certification program that's called Comprehensive Climate Change Related Hazard Vulnerability Assessment. And third, through funding from the Department of Environmental Protection, we are providing technical assistance for 8 municipalities to complete climate vulnerability assessments. And these projects are just getting started right now, be going on starting just this year. And then the fourth thing that we have going on is right now at this very moment, right here and now, we're launching a new gold star in climate readiness in the municipal certification program. So when municipalities earn a gold star, it really means that they've gone all in on working toward one aspect of sustainability. We also have gold stars in health and water and energy as well. So this is a brand new gold star in climate readiness, and having this gold star organizes a set of actions for municipalities to take toward more intentional climate change adaptation, and it really just gives them a path forward for doing this. So the foundation of this gold star is the new comprehensive climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment action that I mentioned earlier. So doing that action, doing that vulnerability assessment is a requirement, one of the requirements for meeting the standards to earn this gold star. So in our climate readiness program, our approach is that, yes, we need to plan for climate change, but we also need to change our planning, change the way that we do things. So climate change means that we have to change, among other things, but how we approach 2 key things. One is land use planning and policy, and the other is natural resource management. So we can, collectively no longer assume that we have some major control over the natural world to shape it as we please. Probably most of us here already knew that, but I think the broader population is understanding that now with the climate change impacts. So that's become really apparent to everyone now, I think. So our best chance at becoming resilient to climate change really is to partner with the environment. In New Jersey, we do have a very rich history of protecting land and enacting strict water quality standards, but we haven't really done as much or a super great job ensuring healthy ecosystems that are free-flowing and self-sustaining, right? So we want to get back to that restoration piece of this. So we have to really start a genuine effort to restore the functioning of natural systems and integrating ecosystem services into our urban environments as well. This is so that we can be flexible enough to adapt to the uncertainty of climate change. Because really, if our natural environment can adapt, then we can adapt, because we really do depend and rely on our natural environment. So I found this graphic, which I think does a good job demonstrating that people are part of the equation for helping ecosystems to adapt to the impacts of climate change, which in turn is going to allow ecosystems to help us to adapt and also to mitigate climate change impacts for both people and nature, right? So the bottom line here is that ecosystems need to adapt to climate change, and our land use and natural resource activities should be doing everything that we can to support that. So how do we do that? Here's one way we can start doing that. We can ask what nature needs from us. How is it vulnerable to climate change? Just like we as people, can't help others until We help ourselves sometimes, neither can nature, like our watersheds, our forests, our marshes, other environmental resources, help us without putting its oxygen mask on first, so to speak, right? So what are we going to do differently to support that? And we can start with a comprehensive assessment of vulnerability of our natural system. How do we know what the environment needs from us to adapt to climate change if we don't ask the questions, right? We need to ask the right questions, and we're still trying to figure out what those questions are. But we can start by looking at climate vulnerability from the perspective of the environment as a whole, the natural system, so to speak. So we do have an opportunity to do this with an amendment to the municipal land use law that was enacted in 2021. It requires a climate change related hazard vulnerability assessment, or I'm going to call it a CCR HVA because that's easier to say. It requires the CCR HVA to be adopted, included and adopted into the land use plan element of a municipal master plan. So this is important because it is a way for municipalities, land use professionals, and natural resource advocates to partner with each other and partner with the environment to build resilience and ultimately adapt in the face of climate change. And I'm not only, talking about people adapting using nature-based solutions to reduce risk to people and infrastructure. That's definitely something that's needed in one aspect, but I'm also talking about adaptation of the natural system to reduce its vulnerability to climate change and how we can facilitate that and really, really need to facilitate that. So this 2021 law, it does require certain things to be included in the CCR HVA, but it doesn't say how to assess vulnerability or what things should be assessed. So to help municipalities navigate this new law, and also professionals, planners, and the folks that do this kind of work, we worked on creating a very detailed document with a step-by-step planning process and assessment methodology for a model CCR HVA that does include evaluating the vulnerability of the natural system and how to reduce that vulnerability. So the guidance is intended to be used by people as they are in the process of working through doing and completing and conducting a CCR HVA. It's intended to help towns to meet the requirements. There's a list of 7 provisions in that new law. But it also encourages towns to boost local resilience by going deeper and or broader with their CCR HVA. So in the Sustainable Jersey certification program, that new action, the comprehensive CCR HVA action that I talked about, as well as the Gold Star and climate readiness, and also the technical assistance that we're delivering to municipalities, it's all based on this model guidance and following the methodology in this guidance. So one of the novel things in the Guide to Local Climate Change Adaptation Planning is this systems approach methodology. So this is just an approach that we came up with to make it much easier for a town to be able to do a comprehensive climate vulnerability assessment. And this systems approach methodology covers the built, natural, social, economic, and governance systems that support the municipality. So it's really a holistic approach to this. In this methodology, each system is made up of features. So for example, the natural system is made up of 3 features: land, water, and air. So it's pretty simple. We try to simplify things. And then with each feature, you can analyze indicators to assess vulnerability to climate hazards. And we're still, data are always changing and everything like that. So it's a work in progress and always evolving. But I do want to point out that this systems approach, it's applied after the climate hazards have been identified and characterized. So climate hazards are things like flooding, wildfire. So, that's only the first step to identify climate hazards. That's not the vulnerability analysis. The vulnerability analysis looks at how those hazards impact different aspects of the community. So that's where the systems are, those different aspects of the community. So the guide provides specific details on how to analyze and score vulnerabilities based on a combined assessment of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. So if you're not familiar with these terms, this is kind of how we think about vulnerability and try to measure it or characterize it, articulate it. Exposure relates to the simultaneous presence of a hazard and an asset or a feature. Could be something that's not an asset, like a contaminated site or something like that. But where is that? A physical intersection. Sensitivity relates to the ability to withstand exposure to a hazard. And adaptive capacity is the ability to learn from and adapt, or just adjust what you're doing to climate variability and extremes to be able to cope, right? It's that ability to cope effectively and address both the impacts and the causes of climate hazards. So kind of learn as we go approach, right? So vulnerability of a feature, if you kind of apply this as an equation, it's high when the likelihood of impact is high through either exposure or sensitivity, or when adaptive capacity to cope with any impact is low, right? So some of the factors that increase vulnerabilities to climate change for natural resources include things like low biodiversity, high deer damage, low connectivity, no buffer for marsh or floodplain migration, low tree canopy cover that increases heat stress to waterways and understories, high impervious surfaces that increase pollution runoff, and things like localized emissions that degrade air quality. And the list goes on, right? But these are just some examples. We would collect through a vulnerability assessment. And having this kind of information about our natural resources in the CCR HVA puts this information into the land use plan element of the master plan of the municipality. So that's important because from there, we can really start to incorporate restoration throughout the municipal master plan, and also the climate adaptation strategies that get implemented can also kind of permeate through the master plan as well. And that's where a lot of local action kind of stems from. That's the vision for the municipality. So the CCR HVA process basically entails identifying which climate hazards are present or projected to occur in the municipality, the hazards that may be relevant for a community to include in an assessment. It's kind of a long list, but not every hazard is going to be relevant for every community. But we have extreme temperature, drought, flooding, severe weather, saltwater intrusion, ocean acidification, mudslides or landslides, wildfire, disease, and environmental and agricultural pests. So it's a lot of different things to look at. These are all important. Some things are more relevant, like flooding and extreme temperature. We're all dealing with that on a day-to-day basis sometimes. But these other things are important too, especially when we're thinking about projections in terms of climate hazards. So we identify those hazards, and then we analyze how each of the hazards affects a variety of things in the community. So this is where we apply that systems approach methodology that I mentioned earlier. So for the natural system, we analyze the impacts that each of the hazards from the previous slide can have on land and water resources and air quality. So if you're going to be involved in doing a vulnerability assessment in your municipality, these are the kinds of things you're going to need to kind of get familiar with. So we could try it out. If we look at the natural system and we want to evaluate the vulnerability of the water source resource feature, we would look at certain indicators, right, in relation to the list of hazards and how exposure and sensitivity are reflected in these indicators. So, what indicators would we look at for water source resources? We look at things like water quality and water quantity. And then to assess vulnerability, we look at the indicators in relation to the climate hazards. So like I said, not every hazard is relevant to every community, but also not every hazard is relevant to every feature too, right? So in this case, we're looking at temperature, drought, flooding, saltwater intrusion, and mudslides and landslides, and what that can do to water quality, for example. So then we have to sort of do an analysis, right? So these are things that we might be doing in other planning efforts or other reports and things like that. So we do mapping overlays. We're looking for water sources exposed to runoff contamination, saltwater intrusion, heavy erosion, extreme heat, these kinds of things. We can identify sensitivity of water resource areas due to the land use context or water quality status. And then we look at all sorts of information, whatever we can pull together that's relevant, like water testing and drought data, and also just talking to people and the expertise in the community. And so then after you kind of analyze, and evaluate the impact of climate hazards on a feature, we look at adaptive capacity. This is a really important component because this is telling us, how much we can cope with the hazard impacts, right? This is a part of the equation of vulnerability. So analyzing adaptive capacity involves looking at basically in a municipality, how operations and decision-making are governed. In the case of a municipality, these are things like code enforcement, land use ordinances, programs that are being enacted, municipal protocols and procedures, whether any studies were conducted, if there is any capacity on staff for this work or to administer programs, and whether there's a plan for funding climate adaptation actions. All of these things are important for the long-term adaptive capacity of the municipality. So on this slide, you see, you can't read it, just like a image of one of the worksheets in the guide. So the Guide to Local Climate Change Adaptation Planning is packed with worksheets and detailed guidance for every single step of the CCR HVA process. The things I've been talking about, but also putting together a team, engaging the community, assigning vulnerability scores, which I'll talk about in a moment. So this is, just one page from one worksheet, but there are many, many more resources in this guide. And the guide also aligns exactly with that municipal land use law so that municipalities can be sure that they're meeting all the provisions of the law as they work through it and work through this process. So there is a vulnerability key provided in the guide to help articulate vulnerability in terms of low, moderate, and high. So just kind of having a number doesn't really, kind of communicate the issue or concern. So we want to put some words around that and understand that. So using this key, vulnerability scores get assigned to features based on outputs of any analyses, like the one I just described for water resources. Stakeholder input, so community engagement is very important in this process, and then deliberations among the project team. So it's not, an exact science that you're going to, push a button and come out with something. There is some art and some work and thinking around this and a lot of different perspectives. But the vulnerability key helps the municipality to put a score on hazard impact to be able to get that relationship and understanding of really what is that combination of exposure and sensitivity and adaptive capacity for this particular feature. How should I prioritize this and all the things I need to think about in climate change? Because when you compare the impact to adaptive capacity to cope with that impact, that's what gives you an overall vulnerability score. So after you go through all that work of doing the CCR HVA and analyzing impacts and vulnerabilities, then it's time to prioritize strategies and take action. The planning work leading up to the actions is really good and helpful because it, like I said, helps you prioritize where do you put those limited resources, what's most important, who's most impacted by what. But this is where the Gold Star in climate readiness comes in from the Sustainable Jersey Certification Program. It is a collection of actions that municipalities can take to adapt to climate change. It is organized around the systems approach methodology of the CCR HVA model guidance as well. So here are some examples of actions in the Gold Star. I don't have time to go through all the actions in the Gold Star, so you'll have to check out the website for more examples. But around the built system, these are some things. The program has actions for things like evaluating and addressing urban heat islands, reducing impervious cover through green infrastructure planning and implementation, and requiring the local planning and zoning boards to consider green development when they're reviewing development applications. That last one is super important because that is what determines and dictates land use. And in this definition of green development, it's more than just energy efficiency and things like that. We've modified a number of our actions, and in this one in particular have put in a number of things related to climate adaptation in our sort of green development definition. So these can have some real impact in terms of municipal governance and decision making and what actually gets put on the ground. In the natural system, some examples include planning for community forestry, trees, and open spaces, and promoting water conservation in the community. And we are, looking at developing a number of new actions because this, the program hadn't, evolved with climate change in mind. And so now that we know this is a thing, we are developing a bunch of new actions, and many of them will be in the natural system as we go forward. And then I think this is my last slide. In the Gold Star for Climate Readiness, the governance system includes the most actions. These would relate to government actions, such as adoption of any ordinances, enforcement of ordinances, and any activities related to emergency management, planning, and implementation. So there are a number of great things here that are really important for the community and for the municipality to be paying attention to. There are a lot more actions related to climate readiness besides just these few that I've outlined here. So check out the new Gold Star to learn more. If you have any questions, reach out. And thank you, and I'll pass it on to Tom now.
Good afternoon, folks. If anyone saw me this morning, this is going to be slightly a little bit of a repeat for 2 or 3 slides, just so we can get a little context here. So Woodbridge Township, over 350 years old, over 3,000 acres of regulated floodplain. We have tidal and fluvial water bodies in the township, and we're made up of 10 unincorporated communities under one township. I say all that because it matters, especially when we look at flood maps, right? So this is just a quick, kind of high level overview of what our special flood hazard areas look like in terms of the federally regulated areas. Obviously, everything going on with the inland flood rule isn't shown on here, but we have done our own mapping of that in town as well. So again, Woodbridge has a lot of water. We all have a lot of water to manage and to be responsible for. And one of the neat things about Woodbridge is historically, it was one of the first coastal retreat destination towns in this in New Jersey, right? So a lot of folks don't realize that Boynton Beach doesn't just exist in Florida; it also exists in Seawarren. And for a while, folks came by boat before the automobile was popular. And now what stands there, unfortunately, is a monument. And how do we get from monuments to movement, from movement to adaptation, right? So what does that look like? And that's just showing you where the location is. And a lot of the slides that will come next are going to talk about floodplain restoration processes that we've worked on collectively over the last 12 to 13 years with Dr. Brooke Maslow at Rutgers. So one thing I want to touch on, resiliency rolls off our tongue now, right? Everyone says resiliency like it's a normal phrase, it's a normal word. It never used to be the case. So Sandy changed a lot of that. Sandy's elevations in the lower Woodbridge River reached 12.5 feet. FEMA delineations on effective maps are about 9 feet. On preliminary maps are about 13 to 14 feet. So Sandy did damage. And much like the monument that's left here now, we're going to keep seeing these things happening, right? So in order to get to these adaptation parts that Tanya talked about, in Woodbridge, we're not calling it a wake-up call anymore. It's not a once-in-a-lifetime event. We're talking about these things that as a reality and trying to educate folks, and I'll get into this later, about what the 100-year storm means. And I hate when folks use that on television. So just showing, Sandy and Irene, and then the local impacts, right? So this was Ida in 2021. This is actually going to be a site where we're installing flood monitoring devices at our underpasses where we've had stranded cars before, and we've had folks unfortunately perish. But this is just another example of what Ida looked like, right? So you would need a storm pipe the size of this room to handle what Ida dropped in the amount of time it dropped, right? So designing for these things needs to start to look different, right? So as we look at these types of ways to adapt, it's a comprehensive plan. So we're working on comprehensive planning for our entire watershed right now. It was produced by an engineering firm, and it's just now again, it's not a plan that's sitting on a shelf. It's a plan that we're using on a day-to-day real life scenario of what needs to be updated and when it needs to be updated. So whether that's a storm sewer pipe, whether that's an inlet, whether we want to remove the pipes and go back to nature. These are all things that are being considered as a result of this study. So by doing that, we're planning like nature has no memory, and we have to implement like time has no heart. I can't overstate that enough, because we all know in this room that the 100-year storm can happen twice in the same year. It might not happen for 10 years. It's a statistical analysis associated with an engineering parameter. Now, try to explain that to the public on a day-to-day basis, right? So by doing that, we need to reimagine what it looks like. So this is a rendering of a complete street that we have fully designed and engineering plans for. And it's just one example of things that we're doing in town to get to these points that Tanya is talking about, right? So when we started to talk about updating our master plan, and I, sat down with our director of planning, there wasn't any heartburn about this, because we do this stuff, right? Yeah, it has to get in our master plan, and we're working on that. But the reality is, we started doing rain garden work about 7 or 8 years ago, and we've never stopped. So we started at all of our libraries first. And the reason we started there was for an educational component. So we host talks there. We talk about the importance of rain gardens. We're doing a whole lecture series with our libraries right now about the importance of, what stormwater is, that it's not filtered, it goes right to our waterways. And speaking of which, we're also embarking on a new Paint the Drain campaign with our schools. So that's going to be a competition with schools. We're really excited about it. And again, it's another educational component to let folks know, hey, what we're managing here, you might be swimming in the summer. Again, just more concepts for education and outreach. We did a rain barrel giveaway. You could see the QR code on the top here, and folks just kind of entered into a contest. But again, just more education and outreach about what these devices are, why they're important, how to install them. I think I touched on that already, but I will say so in Seawarren, in the area of Boynton Beach that I mentioned earlier, we are working on a living shoreline. I think we're one of the most northern towns in the state to be doing so, other than like Jamaica Bay and those kinds of areas. But living shorelines work with nature. They do everything that Tanya talked about, right? They're nature-based solutions to address issues that we all deal with, right? So what is lovely about them is that they're also great for habitat. So, when we started to frame these conversations and we met with folks in town, one of the things that came up right away, folks who fish, including myself, were concerned about installing a sill, and they were concerned about access. Now, I can't say enough that it's important to work with your communities and to work with folks that are going to be enjoying and seeing the benefits of these projects. So this is an early concept, but we did some changes to the plans. We worked with the American Little Society and Captain Al, Dr. Chris Abrupta at Rutgers, and we took the comments from the public and incorporated it into the plan to make sure that folks like me can still fish. Just a sign here about gray infrastructure itself. You might be able to see at high tide, this is a stormwater outfall. At high tide, that bridge line is just about inundated. Now, what goes into an elevation project like this is massive funding. And I will say it's something we're working on. I won't touch on the federal funding stuff right now, but this is an example of something that we've worked on in the past for a brick application to flood-proof our sanitary pump station, which you can see resides in a lovely location right on the river. So working with Rutgers and restoration, right? So what does that mean? So we essentially decided that these were projects that need a bigger holistic approach. So we rezoned different parts of our floodplains, and they are now called open space conservation and resiliency zones. So there's no new construction, We do cumulative substantial improvement in those areas. And basically, it follows, this is an image of the Watson Crampton floodplain buyout area where over 150 structures were bought out through the Blue Acres program. And the rezoning efforts essentially follow ground elevation, repetitive loss areas, future inundation levels. All of that went into the planning associated with rezoning. And again, so, you know, this is an image of a pop-up historical event that occurred in Monmouth County. And I love it because it brought people together to talk about the storm and to reflect on what they felt and what they lost and what all these new terms mean, right? So ABFEs and P firms, and I mean, terminology that folks never heard before, right? And of course, the restoring the shore concept, right? But again, restoring the shore looked different in Woodbridge. So that's our Director of Planning and Development, Marta. And like I said, so it meant bringing people together. So the Blue Acres program coming to Woodbridge was new to everyone. It was new to most of the state at the time. And I just want to say, buyouts are not always the answer, guys. I'm not here to tell you that, right? But they're a tool in the toolbox, right? And living in it, you know, managing a town that's over 24 square miles, 10 unincorporated communities, you know, we're doing redevelopment around transit-oriented places, getting people out of harm's way, doing the right kind of redevelopment to make sure that this doesn't happen again. So these were public outreach meetings that we conducted right after Sandy. And it was basically just an opportunity to start that conversation about those next steps. I think that might be all I have for you guys. So thank you.
So Tanya and Tom set me up real nice with their presentations and by far better than what I've put together. I think I was a little distracted by the Super Bowl parade. Maybe. I don't know. So welcome everyone. I'm Jacqueline Rhodes, Executive Director of Pinelands Preservation Alliance. And Tanya, like I said, set up real nicely about how to do assessments, right? Excellent guidelines, guidebook on how to do that. Tom's talking about like how they're really taking that to action in the town. And from my standpoint, presentations talking about focused on flooding, but looking at assessments that are done both inland and on coastal, and that what actions we're taking from those assessments. So trying to connect those pieces together. I was just curious. So how many people are here because their nonprofit or college made them come? Don't worry, don't be offended. Not made, but you wanted to come too. How many people are here because of you're in a municipality and you're interested in doing more? Okay, great. All right, good to see that. All right, so about us a little bit, and I realize now I'm like, that looks a little small. But in any case, you're probably wondering a little bit about the Pinelands and how come we're doing stuff on the coastline. But in actuality, the Pinelands National Reserve extends to the coast in certain places. And we like to identify ourselves as protectors and stewards of this region. We have worked beyond the boundaries of the Pinelands, and the Pinelands accounts for about 20% of the state, you know, encompassing multiple counties, about, you know, 55 if you have small pieces of municipalities throughout South Jersey. And a lot of our work has focused predominantly in the early years on advocacy, but really more so now on education, inclusion, stewardship work. So a lot of what I'm focused now is a lot of that direct action and activities that take place on the ground. So obviously focused on stormwater, community resiliency, climate resiliency, if I'm still allowed to say that, et cetera. So we are members, and I bring this up because I want to make note of the partners focusing on defending our natural resources as well as communities from flooding. So we're part of the Flood Defense Coalition. It includes Association New Jersey Environmental Commissions, League of Conservation Voters, Rutgers, Highlands Coalition, and others that, of course, I'm blanking on everyone, that are really looking for ways to protect all of those communities from stormwater pollution as well as localized nuisance flooding that hopefully in creating and assessing our vulnerabilities can really build up a community to address even maybe bigger floods and at least being prepared for that. So I'll talk more about flood defense and some of those strategies in a little bit, but first I want to share a program that our organization organized back in 2017 that we call our Landscape Makeover Program, which now is extending into the Highlands area as well. And we're continuing to look for funding opportunities that extend, throughout a good portion of New Jersey. And the idea behind this program is really about, assessing the vulnerability in a community, coming up with good plans because of all the impervious surfaces that we have in our communities now. And so the program itself, working with Rutgers, they developed great impervious coverage assessments, as well as impervious coverage reduction action plans, which I finally refer to as ICRAP. Don't tell Chris I call it that. But it's easier to remember. But the idea there is to get the crap out of our community so that we have more livable resilience landscapes, right? So it's coming up with that plan to transform those impervious surfaces to, the green infrastructure that we talked about. And as Tanya mentioned, you get points for coming up either with an action plan or putting in elements of green infrastructure in order to meet your sustainable Jersey goals. So the program has that municipal component as well as the homeowner component. So you do your planning, you look at where there are opportunities, and then where our organization, in combination with a whole variety of other organizations throughout the state, we try to work together in making those projects happen. And so the idea is to make it easy for communities. With funding that we get, we go through the process of hiring whoever needs to be hired to either dig out a site, bring in all the soil as needed, bring in the plants, where we could work with municipalities so that they do the digging out to save some money, work with schools in terms of having students or teachers come out and do the plants if it's at a school site or other municipal site. And so trying to connect all those pieces together. It also includes education. So we offer virtual sessions to really anybody. You don't have to be in a rebate area. You join, you get to learn more about the program, about how you can transform your landscape, and then offering free a design session to homeowners to build the rain garden. So they sit with landscape architects through Rutgers and show their property, and they come up with a great design and work together. And so they have this complete kit together to be able to build it. And then if they build it, then we get photos and we give them money, like cash money, not a gift card. So we write them a check. And you would think that would all be great and easy, but in reality, it's actually a lot harder to get people to take our money. So we're trying to revamp the program a little bit more in actually building it for them, as opposed to just saying, we'll give you money after the fact. So there are little tweaks to the program, but it's been really successful, operating now for over 7 years, providing rebates, working with municipalities, and doing these projects. So for the municipalities, we give them this great sign. So then obviously the community members can now see everything that they're doing. And this is probably all like, oh yeah, I've heard this before, right? Lots of people are doing green infrastructure. It's great. But again, we're trying to work together as a coalition and making these projects happen, being really efficient, right? Everybody wants to hear about efficiency these days, right? With our money and making sure we could do many more projects out there. So, they get a rendering. Tom showed a nice rendering that they had done for their Complete Streets program. This is an example at a school. We've done, like I said, these plans. In this particular case, this is in Hamilton. And one thing I want to mention here is that we have created an aspect of this program specifically focused on lakes now. So working in lake communities immediately surrounding a lake, trying to concentrate efforts in order to improve the water quality in these places. Because as we know, a lot of stormwater floods into there and obviously creates a lot of problems. So trying to really, at a micro level, put in projects. It could be trees, it could be rain gardens, it could be buffers, both on residential properties as well as municipal, and even trying to get businesses involved. So we're creating this nice community immediately surrounding the lake, concentrating those efforts. So in Hamilton, we're working there. There's a lake assessment that was done with a whole listing of projects that can happen. Here's one that we built right next to the canoe club there. So a lot of people get to see it, as well as obviously providing some direct benefit to the lake itself. So coming back to the Flood Defense Coalition. So when we think about all of these projects, it's great. You get rain barrels, you get trees, you put in your rain gardens. But as we know, that costs money. And as nonprofits, we're trying to obviously garner those resources so that we can help the communities and make it easier for them to do the work, but also convince them that it is a good practice. But as you know, we need them to take action. And so joining Sustainable Jersey, trying to achieve the marks necessary to get their points and move up in the ranking, getting grant funding, it's all great. But in addition, creating a stormwater utility, obviously super helpful, because now through that utility, you can do assessments, right? As part of that, you're trying to figure out what else do we need to do? How much money do we need to raise? What does the landscape look like if you don't have an impervious coverage assessment, if you don't have, that connecting to your flood assessment? This is your opportunity to do that, which of course protects homeowners as well as our natural resources. So as part of our flood defense, our goal is to provide that education, show how projects can work, give examples, again, trying to help foster that process through to the end in order to create a stormwater utility, because that really can help be the vehicle to continue forward and hopefully indefinitely in transforming our landscapes and addressing these vulnerabilities. So moving from inland to shore, going to talk a little bit about our program to protect back end of beaches. And this is slightly different from Living Shoreline, as you had heard. Some Living Shoreline projects really are actively restoring those landscapes. In this scenario, we're talking about just kind of leaving things alone, which might sound counterintuitive to, our whole restoration scheme. But in reality, we know nature can come back. You leave it go, it has a way of figuring it out. And so again, being super efficient these days, this program really is an avenue for doing that. And so I had mentioned before, what's the Pinelands doing over on the coast side, which I'd already explained. But in reality, our region, the Pinelands, part of a UNESCO biosphere reserve, we have very unique creatures that exist there. And many of the plants that we also are concerned about protecting extend to these places. So, we can't always just, abide by the political boundaries that exist there, although sometimes we really do. But not in our case when we're protecting the ecological systems. So, great place. Obviously, people want to have their beaches to enjoy, But what we want to do is not impede with those services, but just respectfully manage the back end of the beaches. And obviously, this is a huge issue, right? Coastal resilience, Hurricane Sandy, we heard about. Obviously, people experiencing insane flooding. And we have opportunities to protect both our natural resources as well as our residential communities. So what's interesting here is an assessment that was done of coastal rare plants. This was not done by me, but our partner, Dr. Jay Kelly at Raritan Valley Community College. And what's interesting here is, as part of his assessment and looking at, all these cool species of plants, were obviously their numbers. And what he had found is, those places that had less disturbance actually on the back end of beaches obviously had more plants. And again, intuitively, yeah, sure, that makes sense, right? We're not raking them, we're not driving over them, etc. What does that mean? And yes, they're cool. They're really pretty annual plants, and they will come back again if they have the resources and the habitat necessary for it. So this is just like a little showing of some of the places where you could see some of those plants starting to spread out from like the dune system there. And again, from our perspective, if we just cared about the natural resources, we want to protect these places. Here's what it looks like after the fact of us manipulating it. So raking, driving, even excessive walking will completely erode those plants. Just by simply stopping this, which occurs on 74% of the New Jersey shoreline, we can see a big change. Here again, you're allowed to drive on the beach. Now, not saying that we eliminate those activities in its entirety, but if you live in a coastal municipality, here's an opportunity by some simple changes and kind of limiting that activity to a certain portion of the beach can actually protect that area, again, without planting anything, without having to spend money. If you want to put signs up, great, like the one we have here, plant protection area. I forget how much money we spent, but it wasn't a lot getting those signs, and then getting just like plain wood posts that you pound into the sand, and then putting just string across, and then signs here and there. Again, super cheap. You get volunteers. They could come out. Lots of fun going out there to do this. So we've helped organize that. So as a result of Dr. Kelly's assessment, we're like, oh, it makes sense. Sure, we'll help move this project along and reach out to the municipalities and said, look, here are the assessments. This is what we're showing. They would say, we don't really care about your plants. Maybe. Well, very frequently they don't care about the plants. But when we tell them the other benefits associated with it, which again, they might not care about the shorebirds or migration or anything like that. But at the bottom, accelerate dune development. So we're talking about coastal communities very vulnerable to the flooding and storm events that we've had. And what you find is that by protecting the natural dune versus having to spend all that money putting in artificial dunes, that you see a dramatic difference in terms of the flooding impacts in the community. So altogether, it's like a win-win. We protect our plants and our birds. We get to protect their homes at the same time. No one has to spend a lot of money. You don't have to go through Army Corps, all by just saying, okay, we're going to restrict down here and not just rip out all the vegetation on the back end. I don't know. Makes a lot of sense to me, but So these are some of the places where it's taken place of just simple post and string approach to the back end of beaches. Now, there are some policy requirements out there, like if you're in a short community and you're asking for more sand because it's eroding away. Well, as part of you getting your sand, you now need to put in measures to say you're doing this. There has been some change. I will say that. Towns are starting to get it, probably because either they're tired of spending money, or part of the money, or complaining about it, or, because they're like, oh yeah, I guess we really believe some crazy stuff is happening out there in the climate. So again, just looking at the difference. So we've been providing, presentations, giving informational material like flyers that they can have in the community building, signs, again, that we can post. And a lot of this work typically will happen has to happen before Memorial Day. So you do that, you have them post up, they can even take them out at that point. Because once you get through a season, you start having that vegetation come back, it creates almost like its own natural border. But you still have to get through that transition phase. So here's kind of like before and after in just a few short years of protecting that area, how much vegetation comes back. Like I said, you don't have to plant anything. There's no seeds involved. Besides the individual labor, if you are going to have some kind of artificial or temporary fencing, that's how quickly. And studies have shown by Dr. J. Kelly that the amount of sand that continues to accumulate, so we all know what dunes look like, right? So it's elevated over time. Well, it's elevated as a result of this vegetation pulling the sand together and building layers. So that ultimately, creates the dunes that we have today. And so in just a few short years, not only do you have all that vegetation there, but now you start having elevation of land too. And so the beauty of it, again, just let it go and nature will do its work. So these are some of the partners that were involved there as part of the back end beach protection program. And happy to answer any questions for us and the team, right? All right, thank you.
Anybody have a question for one of our panelists? Yes, hold on, I'll come back with the microphone.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can.
Oh,
The mic isn't working.
no, I saw I heard what you said about not requiring any seeds, but what happens when there's not much dune or natural area for the seeds to, flow in from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So these are annual plants. So meaning their root system doesn't come back. What happens is they produce seed and then it gets dispersed in a variety of ways, like, wind, birds, or whatever. So there have been some cases where if you have completely devoid of anything, and by protecting this, there isn't like a seed bank left in the sand, then there might be opportunity where starting to experiment like dispersing that seed there. But it's interesting, a lot of places that they thought a particular plant was completely gone, like you said, nothing left in the sand, no seed bank. In a couple years, they find it shows up there. So there is a way, and a lot of times the seed obviously can remain dormant for many, many years, and it just doesn't have the right conditions there. So find that in many cases, you still don't have to do anything. It's in the soil. It's in the sand. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Anybody else have a question? Yes, Rick.
This is for Tanya. So the question I have is, you have the two matrices there, in terms of the different hazard ranking or the like. And within your guide, how is there guidance there in terms of how you decide this is low versus medium versus high? you know, in terms of making those kinds of decisions?
Yeah, so I wish I had it in front of me to tell you exactly what it says, but that vulnerability key, so it's the scale is 1 to 5. So, you know, if you have a low vulnerability, it sort of does a scenario description and says, you know, your municipality is prepared to handle climate change because it has land use ordinances in place and it has, you know, XYZ. So like all the things that you went through in the evaluation through sort of, you know, moderate is, you know, there's moderate, you know, concern that built infrastructure will be impacted to the point where it cannot serve its function. So it kind of like just sort of puts it into words. And there, like I said, you kind of have to, it's a little bit of an art. You have to, you go through this long process, looking at these different things, talking to different people, and kind of come to a conclusion where you are on that scale based on like what you feel like the scenario is for the municipality. And there, so it requires some honesty to be honest, you know, so you have to sort of recognize where your gaps are to say we're vulnerable because we will be highly impacted by, you know, a wildfire that comes through or an infectious disease or, you know, flooding obviously is one we think about, but we don't think about these other ones too much, but kind of prompts with
Some
those
prompts and then some
descriptions.
kind of consensus building.
Yeah,
et cetera.
and you know, all along the way, the analysis, you're getting data. So those are they feed into that, but before you start reading that key, there is a table. So you input like sort of for those values for each feature. You input, and so you kind of go across the line looking at all of the hazards cumulatively impacting any particular feature and kind of add it up, and then you can make adjustments based on deliberations because, you know, some data were left out of the specific analysis. But it gives you sort of like scenarios, prompting, wording after you've done your analyses. So you have data to go into making that determination based on those.
Thank you.
Thomas, I have a question for you about the area that you rezoned and whether that was politically contentious and what kind of outreach you did to the community to explain what you're going to recommend.
So it, you know, I think a lot of this stuff can be contentious, right? But the reality is we have an amazing township administration. The mayor is a huge supporter of these projects. He's been in office for over 18 years now. And yes, we did a ton of outreach to the community to let them know what was going on. I send letters every year to that zone, and we actually ask for registration for the property owners. And we only do that because it's such a high risk area. We want to know who's living there, if you have oxygen, if we need to get to you, tell us, you know, we want to know that. So in terms of pushback, that has not occurred too much. To be honest, there's not many residents living in these zones anymore. So, you know, you're always going to have a couple folks that, you know, tug on your ear, but you got to do, you know, do the right thing.
Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah.
Tom, I just wanted to follow up on that. Tom Delesio, Musconetcong Watershed Association. The title of the zone is Open Space Conservation Zone, and this is private property, and there's development on it. Municipal land use law has a very specific definition of open space. Is the intent that you'll never allow those folks to rebuild or build on those properties?
Correct. So,
And that's specifically in the zoning ordinance.
correct.
They didn't view that as a taking?
Sorry?
They didn't view that as a taking?
It wasn't simply because I think it was more of a consensus of the community to realize that these are not places that we should keep building in. I'm sure we could have had legal arguments about this. It hasn't been challenged. It hasn't. Some of the difficulties there are more along the lines of documenting cumulative substantial improvement, cumulative damages, things like that. That falls on me, right? But yeah, I mean, the reality is most of that land in the open space conservation resiliency zone is owned by DEP Blue Acres, right? So it can't be built on anyway. It already has a deed restriction. What we did is just kind of took that next step and said, okay, these, little holdouts that we have here, we respect it, right? But if you're going to stay here, we want you guys to be safe.
Just to add to that, the reason that's fascinating is 30.
Wait, Tom, just wait a minute so the Zoom people can hear.
Reason it's fascinating is 30, 35 years ago, we looked at on a statewide issue, the idea of existing use zoning, which New York State has, but New Jersey doesn't. And we didn't move it because it was viewed as being a taking. This is in effect existing use zoning. Congratulations.
Hi, thank you for all of you for your presentations. Tanya, I'm a political science nerd, so I love system level analysis and things like that. But I was kind of wondering if you guys have found, this is for any of you, have found any success in going to administrations or municipalities that aren't necessarily, how do I say this, friendly to the idea of climate change. And instead of saying this is going to help you be resilient to climate change, instead of saying like the next time a storm comes, this is going to help reduce flooding, just like changing that language, if you guys have found any kind of success in that.
Well, I would say, we're a technical assistance program, so we provide technical assistance to the towns that want it and receive it, but in general communications, and, just sort of other, trying to get, in developing this guide, it was a collaborative effort, so we really wanted to get as many people and communities kind of on board with the concept. So yeah, you tailor the messaging, so ultimately it's an investment, it saves you money. You and a lot of towns actually will get very interested in this because we're, our legacy development is in floodplain. So many downtowns are along waterways and in flood hazard areas. And so it's an economic development issue for a lot of municipalities. So that is kind of like the entry point. So yeah, we need to do exactly that, kind of walk in and tailor the sort of opening line to what that municipality is going to be most, or even that person that we're talking to is going to be most receptive to.
I would just add to that it's absolutely critical to have good messaging. That's why our Flood Defense Coalition, we made sure we really just focused on some of the different impacts in communities as opposed to even bringing up climate change.
Hi, Tanya. I was wondering about the development of your Gold Star programs, kind of like how Sustainable Jersey kind of brings your stakeholders together and like who kind of worked on the elements in that program. Or I'm sure it's different for each one, but like you could use your climate vulnerability one as an example.
So I think if I'm understanding the question, like how are the Gold Stars like developed?
Yeah.
So I wasn't involved in the other ones to speak about those. I don't know. But this one, so we had, like I said, this huge collaborative effort around the development of the guide. And we also did a guide for the Highlands region as well. So there was another huge collaborative effort. So relying on that process and a couple of folks that we were still in touch with, we kind of wanted to get this out there, make it available. So at this point, we relied on that information and that input to pull actions that are already existing in the Sustainable Jersey program that kind of, were around that vulnerability assessment action. That was the only new one. So I would say that, to develop this one, it's kind of still ongoing. We do have funding to, over the next several years, kind of build it out to be more intentionally tailored toward climate resilience, because we need to develop some new actions around that. So it's still kind of a work in progress.
Well, I think we will cut it off there. And Erin, do I have a couple more slides here? I have this screen on my screen for some reason. I'm going to do anything. There, see it. Okay, I figured it out. So if you are wanting to get a CEU for this session, please remember to sign out and complete any forms. And here's the form to return. And don't forget that at 4:15, Dr. Sean Stallings will be here speaking with us and networking. So please join me in thanking our panelists for this great session.